So I think it just goes back to using the data that you have, and we have so many years of data that we can rely on to make good decisions. So I do recognize that why these markets are on this slide, but I think it's just how you manage through it.
This episode of the Student Housing Insight Podcast is sponsored by the Guarantors. If you're an operator, you know the importance of a parental guarantor. Having parental guarantors legitimizes your rent roll. But have you ever tried collecting from a parental guarantor after their student skips out or they have to be evicted? How quickly were you able to recoup lost rent from that parental guarantor? The truth is, if things get to a point where a student skips out or is evicted for non-payment, the parental guarantor doesn't care about their credit score. There may have been a job loss or even a divorce. No background check is going to tell you which parent is about to leave their spouse or has an employer who is about to downsize. So how do you eliminate that risk? I mean, reducing risk is like the top 3 responsibilities of a property manager. Well, the Guarantor's rent coverage product does just that. Not only will it ensure that you can quickly recoup lost rent, but it will also increase your prospect to lease conversion rate because you're not waiting on a parent to provide their information. This product makes so much sense for student housing assets, and that's exactly why I'm now advising my asset management clients to forget about parental guarantors and talk to the Guarantors. You can find more information about their rent coverage product as well as other risk reduction products they provide to the student housing industry by going to theguarantors.com/student. You can also find the link in the show notes. Welcome to the Student Housing Insight Podcast, where we are putting you in touch with all things student housing. Did you like that?
Yeah, I did. I was wondering if you were going to make that change.
Yeah, I did it on the last podcast, and yeah, I like it. And so for those of you that don't know what we're talking about, we've updated our website on a few things. I used to always open this up with, we're putting you in touch with the people who bring student housing to life, but we've done a lot of stuff to the website recently, including adding a job board. And the events page has gotten really enhanced. And so, yeah, we kind of changed that tagline up a little bit. So let me know how you like it. But I am your host for today's podcast, Wesley Dees. I'm also the CEO of Student Housing Insight. Student Housing Insight obviously is not just a podcast. It is a platform for us, I mean the folks that are in the off-campus student housing industry, to come together, share ideas, data, and learn from each other. So go check us out at studenthousinginsight.com. And joining me today, you've already heard the wonderful voice of Gretta Dare.
Oh, yeah. This voice sounds wonderful.
so I feel bad because the audience has had to deal with my sinus stuff over the past 6 weeks that I feel like I'm finally starting to come out of.
It's past 6 weeks. It's the last 6 years, because it's really always just on and off with you. Let's be honest.
This is true, but it's this time when the pollen is really flowing in the southeast that we get this wonderful nasally type of voice. But yeah, so I would like to say yours may have to do with allergies of being in a new location. Gretta has moved from Charlotte to Indianapolis. Maybe you want to talk a little bit about that, but no, you're actually getting over
plague.
Yeah,
I have a plague. There's a plague in my house that I managed to catch. There was no way around it. The small human had it for approximately 3 weeks, and I did my best to dodge and weave, and here we are. So yeah, and it has a death grip on my body, and it's been amazing. But yeah, no. So I'm back in Indy, and here we are.
Well, thanks for joining and spending some time with us, because last week while you were moving, we had a very important shop talk.
That was a very, very great shop talk. I was sad I didn't get to watch it in real time because it was very important, and I got to rewatch it, and good stuff. Very good stuff.
Yeah. So we were talking about pre-leasing and the current status of year-over-year trends. We'll kind of jump into that here in just a second. But you're my marketing and leasing guru, and a lot of folks really want to know what Gretta thinks when it comes to the status of what's happening with leasing across the country.
There are a lot more important people on that shop talk for sure, but I'll definitely chime in.
Well, I think, what gives, and we're going to play the interview from the shop talk. Now, there's a lot of information that we're, obviously reviewing from College House, and I would encourage everybody, to go to our website. You can see everything there. We will also, I guess I'll go ahead and upload it. I haven't uploaded it yet, but we've also got the slide deck there that you can download and take a look at. But let's first go back to March's shop talk, where for the first time in a very, very long time, we saw a year-over-year trend that was more than 1%. To kind of track, so everybody's kind of tracking. Let's look at this past year, or this current leasing cycle. September, everything got off to, well, let me even go back to 2022 and 23. That leasing season for fall 23 was, it beat all the numbers from the year before, both with rent growth, both with leasing velocity. And there was a big question of, okay, are we going to continue to see this happening into the fall? Leasing, I think, started for most people earlier than it ever has before. In fact, we did a webinar in September where we had a lot of folks within the industry saying they've never seen it like this before, folks that are just kind of coming in the door and they weren't even necessarily pushing for it. I think that's a key thing. Even in that webinar, there were folks that said, yeah, we haven't even really launched our marketing plans yet, and or even finalized their marketing plans, and they had specifically renewals that were coming in. I think there were a few companies out there that were, and I think that may have actually, I think there's a lot of other folks in the industry that benefited from that, because students were hearing that, from other companies that were being maybe a lot more intentional about getting out of the gate as quick as they could. But yeah, there are a few companies that had come out and was pretty intentional about hitting things early, hitting things right after move-in day. And I think a lot of other folks, a lot of other companies within the industry probably benefited a little bit from that. But then we got into October. We were trending a little bit behind for ShopTalk in October. We were reporting negative 0.8, so almost negative 1% behind year over year. But November, that jumped forward to almost 2%. November 13th, it was reported at 1.8%. Just a couple of weeks later, December 1st, it was at 1.1% ahead. And then January 8th, it was at 0.1%. And so that was, we're just trending right along with last year. February 12th, a negative 0.7%. So, it seemed like it was just really in line. I mean, all of that is, really kind of, I think anything that would be within 2 or 3% would be something that, most people would say was in line. And then March 11th, 2.3% is what we reported at that. Negative 2.3% is what we reported on that shop talk, and gave Charlie and I a couple of new things to talk about, but none of us were really, worrying. Fast forward just really about 10 days from that point, I started getting on a few phone calls that were just part of my monthly routine with certain groups. And I'd keep hearing this. It wasn't a doom and gloom. It was just hey, we're not seeing any leasing happening. What are other folks telling you? Some of these conversations were group conversations where, operators were talking to each other, and they're all kind of seeing the same thing. And so it, as most people do in this industry, they come to me and say, hey, are you hearing from anybody else? And after about 3 or 4 phone calls, in a row over a couple of days, I'm like, yeah, I am. Everybody's talking about it. There's a couple of companies that, don't seem to be very worried about their portfolios, but, for the most part, a lot of operators are really concerned. And talking with the leadership committee about, what to do. For those that don't know, we have a leadership committee for ShopTalk that kind of gives me guidance on things that's impacting the industry and, how we should talk about it. And so, they basically said, Wes, we really want you to cover this for April ShopTalk. And so we got past spring break and everything, and the data started coming in. And for this year, back on, what was it, last Thursday, I guess, April 11th, it was negative 2.2%. So basically the same thing as March. And so that kind of, begged me to really begin questioning, okay, what is this? Because it doesn't necessarily seem that every company is experiencing this. I'll get more into that in just a second. But going back to some of those discussions that I was having in late March, a lot of folks were talking about the FAFSA delays. For FAFSA, and it's FAFSA. I don't know. Why did they come up with an acronym that is so hard to communicate in the English language? I don't understand. But it's FAFSA, free application for financial student aid. Why they couldn't have said free application for student financial aid, I don't know, because everybody could say FAFSA. That's what we're left with, is FAFSA. So for those that don't know, this is basically an application that everybody does when they go to school and they want to get financial aid or see if they're eligible for any type of financial aid. Back in 2020, the Congress basically said, look, this is like a 130-page application. We gotta fix this. And so they told the Department of Ed, get on it. Fast forward 3 years, it was supposed to come out in fall of 23. March of 23, the contractor that they hired said, look, this new website and everything's taken longer. It's not the first time that the government's had problems with releasing a website to do something new. For those that remember the release of healthcare.gov, it had a lot of problems when it was released as well. So I think they thought they were getting ahead of this and announcing it, 7 months prior to it, needing to be ready. I think they thought they got ahead of it. So it didn't come out October 1st like it normally does. And it ended up launching December 1st of 23 for about 4 hours. And then it was taken down and didn't come back up until December 31st. So I hate it if that's what, if you've got children and that's what you spent your New Year's Eve doing. And then even then, I think it came back down and went back up, I think around January 6th. But even since then, they've had delays, a lot of issues with, the system was supposed to be talking with the Internal Revenue System and their platform. That formula was broken. It was a lot. And a lot of this stuff did not come out until, or a lot of these things did not start hitting the schools so that they could get out their information, offer letters, those type of things when it comes to financial aid. For example, let's talk about March 15th. This was what was reported in the Chronicle in one of their stories. And they've been looking very closely at this and tracking very closely. So for anybody that wants an update on and wants to see the history of it and wants to continue following this, Eric Hoover is an author, is a journalist at the Chronicle who's been covering this. So just go to thechronicle.com and look up Eric Hoover and you'll see all of his articles on it. But anyway, he reported, I think it was March 19th, that on March 15th of 2023, University of Nebraska had received over 25,000 of these approved FAFSA applications. And as of March 15th of this year, they had only received, so last year they received over 25,000. For this year, at the same time, they'd only received 10. No, I'm not going to follow that up by saying 10,000. They received 10. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. I think on the day before that article came out on the 18th, they did get, or it came out on the 19th. So on the 18th, I think they did receive another 900 applications. So hopefully that'll give you a little bit of, understanding of how far behind the system is. And so as I started looking at that and seeing that, I'm like, well, yeah, this has got to have some kind of impact. I can't imagine going off to school and not having any idea how much financial aid you've got. I mean, that plays into every decision you're going to make. It's not only the decision of where you're going to go to school, but where you're going to live and everything else that goes along with financing education through financial aid. So anyway, I thought this has got to have some type of impact, and really started looking at it, started putting out a lot of things on LinkedIn, asking that question, started talking to a lot of operators. And I was really surprised. Nobody, Gretta, tell me, if this was knowledge to you and you were working as an operator, from be it site level up to an executive over, marketing and leasing.
Well, that is one of the things I do, but yes.
That is true. What would be one of your instructions, or what would be keeping you up at night understanding this about FAFSA?
It is, are we receiving this feedback from our prospects when you are out touring or asking people to apply? Have you received this feedback from anyone? And asking my on-site team members.
Or that resident who hasn't renewed but hasn't given notice yet. Like,
when we are having our leasing and marketing calls, it's what is the feedback? Are we hearing this? And if not, then can we find this information out? Because this is, and one, it's also because this is one of the things that, we're sitting here thinking about is every single market's different. And I'm going to interject this right now because it is, relevant to what it is that we're talking about. It's going to be market dependent, right? Because if I'm in one of the markets that I'm in, and we don't have a huge demographic that is going to be impacted by FAFSA, because not every single market is going to be, right? So we know that it's going to be a lot of first years, and we know it's going to be a lot of transfer students. You and I talked about this. So if I feel like it's not potentially going to be deeply impacted, then yeah, I'm going to touch base on it. If it's going to be a market where it is deeply impacted, where the school that I work with, where freshmen, sophomores are allowed to live off campus, then I'm going to be like, hey, we need to find out about this immediately. And it's going to be with such an extreme amount of urgency that I would be probably in a state of panic. If it's one where it's not, I'm still definitely going to be looking into it. And I'm going to want to know that from my on-site team members, like I said, on those leasing and marketing calls, and from my on-site team members, because they're one of the greatest resources that we have is from that general information and from our residents, from our prospects, from our guarantors, et cetera. But especially in those markets where our freshmen and sophomores, from those kids where they're allowed to live offsite. And especially when you're talking about March, right? Because that's right when we started to see that downward trend happen. Now, we know that can't possibly be the only thing that we are being so deeply impacted. And we'll talk about that secondary. But absolutely, if that is when we're seeing this enormous amount of lack of approved applications coming through, then yes, this should very much be top of mind. Because even you can pull, and this is something that we had as a part of our annual marketing plans every single year at any of the companies that I managed the annual marketing plan. It is how much of the student body is on financial aid, and that number is available to everyone. It should be a number or statistic that every single one of us is aware of, but it's typically pretty high. And it's usually at least in the 70s or 80% of your student body is on financial aid. And that means that they are waiting for that FAFSA to be approved no matter what, or they're going to be a part of it, at least, like we said, in that first year, sometimes in that second, if they have to reapply, something along those lines. So it is impacting your demographic.
Yeah. And I was just amazed I started really kind of spooking a fire amongst everybody within student housing with some of the stuff I was putting on LinkedIn, because when I say something on LinkedIn and then I hear about it in someone else's webinar, it's a direct relationship to what I said. It's like, oh, okay, so people are actually thinking about this. But a couple of weeks go by and we get into the first part of, right after the Easter holiday weekend, and I started asking these people that were, we were talking about FAFSA. Maybe it's causing a problem. We were talking, around the 18th, 19th, 20th to those folks, and I start following back up with them. And hey, what are you hearing? And it doesn't really seem to be an issue. Okay, have you asked them? Have you surveyed them? How did you get this information? Well, no one's really talked about it to us. Like, I'm sorry. When I go fishing, I typically take a pole and some bait and I throw it in the water. I don't sit on the deck waiting for a fish to jump on the deck. I was a little shocked. And, some of these folks are my personal friends, and I literally gave them that analogy. Like, what are you waiting on?
But that, honestly, and Wes, and again, it's that kind of leads into part of the secondary portion that I feel is, and we can come back to this because it is going to change the topic a little bit, but the analogy that you just gave to me leads into what I feel is one of the contributing factors that I do and have, what I was concerned was going to lead to a possibly negative lease up this year, which was a little bit of complacency that I felt like we were potentially heading into this year, was that people were not going to be as aggressive in this lease up as we have been.
Let me just say it bluntly, because as we get into this conversation with Ben and Stacey and Charlie, as it relates to, and Zach from Greystar, I don't want to forget him. He was our P3 add-on to this that was very, very beneficial. But looking at their data, one, core was only percent and a half behind year over year. Stacey doesn't say it in the ShopTalk, but I think it's fine for me to say they were running 2 to 3% ahead year over year, same store. And so there's that element where I don't want to put those two companies on a pedestal necessarily. I think we're all dealing with this, but like I said, let me say it bluntly. I think over the past 2 years, we have become order takers. And I'm sorry if you're hearing that and you're like, you're talking about my team, you're talking about, I'm sorry, and I know that's not everybody, but let's talk about the Power 5 conferences, those schools, those markets. Things have been really, really great. I've often wondered, you look at the numbers that are coming in and you hear people talking about it and you're like, oh, what did you do? Well, we're kind of doing the same thing we've done, prior to the pandemic, and, not necessarily everything's changed. It was very obvious that this was market driven and not something that had been, a direct result of, in fact, I would say if anything, it was a drawback, a pullback on some of the marketing that was happening. And especially getting out on campus and getting in front of people. And like I said, fortunately I have the, I'm sitting in a position where I'm not overseeing I do from an asset management standpoint, but as far as which, they're doing great. But when it comes to being over an operating company, like, I'm not in that seat. So it's a little bit easier for me to say this, obviously, but yeah, I've been studying this really hard over the past 6 to 8 weeks. And I think there is, to a large degree, I think there's a lot of folks that have just gotten complacent, and I understand why. It's been a fantastic 2 years.
Well, I think that a huge contributing factor, well, there were two. One was we were, again, we talked about this, is that we started in the pandemic. We all had to immediately pull out of touch points in every single market. Nobody was allowed to do guerrilla marketing. Nobody was allowed to be on campus. All the traditional tactics that we were all used to with the aggressive marketing, everyone had to pull out. And the events, all of those things had to be pulled back. And then new tactics had to be found. Digital marketing, SEO, and all of those forms of advertising were implemented, and the marketing dollars were dumped into those really, really ferociously. And there was a shift that happened, and we saw it talked about so much at the conferences, and we saw a lot of effective marketing that worked in that manner. And then we saw a successful lease up, and we saw incredible rents, and we saw incredible rent increases. And so this is twofold from my perspective, is that one, we saw students come back. We saw a great lease up year happen. We saw these huge rental increases. And with that, it was a lot of centralization. We have the same amount of on-site team members? And with that, did the same level of expectation and aggressive nature happen this year, not last year? Because we know that last year we got out, we know that a lot of people got out early, they went hard, and then, were able to slow down because the rental increases were so strong. So this year, since we had those huge rental increases, we had to start this year with that same level, right? But then on top of that, did we start out as early? Did everyone start out as early? Were we as hard and aggressive and as strong with our renewal campaigns as we were pre-pandemic? Were we as hard and as aggressive, as strong with our specials, our concessions, our events? And then were we as hard and aggressive and as strong with our on-campus marketing as we potentially were last year, but pre-pandemic? And when I say that, I'm taking it back to 5 years ago, to those times when we were on campus 3 or 5 days a week, or when it was built in to be there and going to business marketing. We were showing up to the campus administrators with gifts and goodies and trying to build those relationships. Because I can tell you right now, and I feel like I can say this confidently for the markets that I was in, because we were ahead year over year for the whole fall all the way up to March for all of those times. And I know that confidently for some of these operators that were ahead year over year and stayed strong. It's, if you weren't negatively impacted by the FAFSA stuff or something outside of that, it's, were you there? Did you show up early? And were you marketing as aggressively on the ground in front of the students as you had been previously? Or did we fall back and focus so heavily on digital marketing because that's what we've been doing since the pandemic, that just became our go-to move, where we've become so digital and so centralized and so focused on all of this new stuff that we forgot that really is our best form of marketing, because we're still dealing with humans. They're still humans. And tabling and getting those guest cards, there's nothing that's going to give you a real lead, a real true lead that in those actual touch points. If you go set up a table on campus and you actually have that conversation and you get 30, 60, 100, 120 guest cards, those are real students every single time. You don't know if you're going to get that with your Zillow leads. You don't know if you're going to get that with your rent.com lead. Like, I'm not calling out any specific ILS, but we all actually know that to be true. You don't know that with those leads, but you know that if you're on campus every single time, that those are actual students and they're actual student leads, all 60 of them every single time. That is dollar for dollar every single time, no matter what. And how much are we doing that now? Or did we pull back so much and were we not as aggressive this year? And then on top of that, and we talked about this previously with those rental rates, we were so aggressive and we got so much that negatively impact us.
Let's sit on that. So one, let me just kind of lay this out. One, I think probably the main issue, if you're dealing with this, if you're falling behind year over year, and look, we're going to talk about some markets here, like Tampa. I'll get the number in front of me in a second, but it's well over 20% behind year over year. So now, if you're at University of Tampa, you may not necessarily be experiencing that because most of the student housing is at University of South Florida. I mean, 20%, there's a lot that's going on there. So I'm going to point out three things that I think, is causing this, but none of them, just trump the fact that it's a market by market thing. Every market is a little bit different. There's going to be, impacts and influences that are, going to be specific for those markets. But so you've got what we just talked about, which is probably some complacency and maybe even some withdrawal in marketing dollars that were spent, that type of thing. The next part of it could really be related to rates. And I think this is even more of a hot topic, or more of an issue, I should say, in more of your urban markets. And Ben brings up in the ShopTalk interview about Berkeley. I don't think he says this in there, but he said this in the prelim call. We're dealing there with conventional apartments that are, giving away 3-4 months of free rent. Mm-hmm. No student is going, that's real money, especially in California, especially in Berkeley, California. It's going to be really hard to compete with that, obviously. And so, you're going to be seeing that. And we're certainly seeing it here in the UNC Charlotte market. You're going to see that in places like Tallahassee and a lot of these capital cities that also have one of these major universities there as well. If that market is soft, and for a good portion of the country, it is right now, and you're going to be competing with it. So that's where I think rates are really hitting. Then there's places like Boone that have got at Appalachian State, that there really seems to be some pushback on the rates. And a lot of students, I think, are just kind of holding out to see what, may come. Is just getting, completely out of hand. So I do think rates are a big part. I've got my third bullet point, but do you want to stay on that for a little bit?
Well, the one thing that I did want to say, because I don't ever like to, and I think anybody that's ever worked with me already knows, is that it isn't just, okay, here's what we did wrong. It's here's what happened. All right, so then what do we do from here? And it doesn't mean there's nothing that can be done. There's still time. It's okay. So then if in the event that it falls into that category of either of these two things, there's absolutely time to get out there and go hard and hit the streets and make up that impact and be aggressive. And that's coming from experience. Yeah. That, where it's like, I could hit that ground, and you go all the way back to episode 2, right? And, that was sod night, hitting the ground. And after a few weeks, it was like making a huge impact and a splash in a market. And, 5 days a week with a huge amount of time on campus. And you really can turn a market around and make sure that those students are aware that you are there. And in the event that you do feel like you needed that aggressive special to be able to do that as well, you can make those students, aware of the fact that that's there. And you can do that in the event that you feel like your marketing wasn't aggressive enough. So there are solutions to it, and it can be done in a matter of 3, 4, 5 weeks maximum, without a doubt. So just because of the fact that May is right around the corner, hope is absolutely not lost. I've done it a million times.
Yeah. And to move on to the third point, and I would actually really put the financial aid into this category, but I think a lot of people really aren't tracking what's going on with their university. And I'm seeing this in, some markets where, yes, it could be, for example, Penn State, and Ben alludes to this in the ShopTalk conversation. In that market, specifically in State College, you've got this funnel system that's happening from all the satellite campuses where folks are coming in, their sophomore year or after their sophomore year. And in that situation, financial aid becomes to go back really quick to what we kind of talked about at the beginning when it came to FAFSA and who this is really affecting. One reason I don't think we had issues with this delay happening earlier in the season was because, one, they already knew that the new website wasn't going to be up until December. So even though they weren't applying for it yet, if they were already in school, they had a good idea of what they were going to end up qualifying for, right? So I think all of those, renewals and sophomores that were coming off campus, freshmen and sophomores that were coming from on campus to off campus, I think they felt fine with, making, their decision with leasing off campus. Obviously, as we get closer to this time of the year, we're dealing more so with transfer students. Mm-hmm. That's not the case in every market. Obviously, some markets are just late, but specifically in those tier 1 markets and those Power 5 schools, this is when you're really starting to deal with transfer students and students that are, making their graduate school decisions and that type of thing. And for that, like at Penn State, everybody's got to requalify basically. And, you don't know what the main university is going to give you or whatever. So that Ben alludes to it, that is having a real impact there. But one thing I've learned over the past 3-4 years working in a particular market, or actually 2 particular markets, and some things that are happening post-pandemic as far as how admissions is approaching things. Wish there had been more of a game plan, kind of at the state level, because both of these university markets that I'm talking about are, part of state systems. And I wish there had been a little bit more conversation, amongst their board of governors or whatever to really think about this. But they're also competing with each other. And some of those universities made some really smart choices. Some of them made some really bad choices, and it has impacted their enrollment, both positive and negative. And I'm amazed at the number of property managers that I talk to that have no clue. They have no clue that stuff has happened. And I just want to stress to site level managers, like, one of the strongest relationships you need to have is with the admissions office and the administration of your university, because if you're not able to, pick up a phone and get them on, second or third ring, or an email response within, 12 hours, that relationship's not tight enough. You need to work on that.
And that, again, that goes back to going out, taking your gifts, taking your, building that relationship. And that's a part of it. Sending that follow-up email and making sure that that's a part, that's all what we're supposed to be doing.
You had to bring up gifts and goodies, didn't you?
Listen, you know how I feel about gifts and goodies.
And how I feel. You know how I feel about it. It was specifically when it comes
master leases. I've gotten with the gifts and goodies, buddy. You know how many? I don't want to hear it.
Well, I just want to make this point, since
I believe in food.
Since Gretta has put this, nothing turns me inside out the way that I hear folks talk about gifts and goodies. You're very tactical and strategic with it.
But that's why I also wrote that marketing guide that made it very clear exactly how it's supposed to be done. And I'm very clear with the way that those instructions are done. And I give very specific instructions on exactly how you execute that. But I also very much believe in building relationships with food.
Yeah. Don't show up at one of these university offices and with crumble cookie and, a bunch of cards and brochures and say, hey, if you know of anybody, looking for an apartment, this is 99 East on whatever, and we'd love to see the student. Don't do that. Don't do that.
There could be a whole separate conversation about there's a way for this to be done. There's proper ways for it to be done. All right.
Yeah. The problem with that is, I don't know, if you show up with crumble cookie, you're probably going to get some, it's going to get eaten, let's put it that way. But the number of times I've seen somebody come in with a basket of cookies or go in with Krispy Kreme donuts. Look, I'm from North Carolina. I love my Krispy Kreme donuts, but those don't need to just show up in an office with brochures attached to it. Like,
you don't ever
start a relationship. Start a relationship.
Don't be a salesman. You are never a salesperson first. You're building relationships. That's gross.
Yeah. So that's kind of my third point is, look, there's some things that are going on with some of these universities that, are outside of the norm because of things that have happened over the past 4 years and changes that have been made administratively. And, that stuff has a real impact. I mean, I'm working with a university now that, lost almost 2,000. Yeah. Almost 2,000 students because someone didn't take something seriously in the admissions department. and they paid the price with, losing their jobs, and everybody else within that university and off campus have been dealing with it. So.
And then there's basic stuff, just as like a quick tip. And I know that like we keep going off on like little tangents about stuff like this, but other ways to keep up with your universities, just to know kind of up to date little updates on stuff like that. Just basic stuff, their Twitter and their subreddit. And I know that you've heard me talk about the subreddit like a million times.
Yeah.
But I don't care what market you're in, you should be on your university subreddit. The level of insight, the random stuff that you'll find out about delays, about housing information, stuff like that, and sudden up-to-date information, you will always find out between those two resources, you will get immediate bits of information, or the university's police, the on-campus police. So those are the main ones to be able to follow as well. If you haven't developed that relationship yet that Wes was talking about, or if you're still working on it, those are great resources to be able to get that up-to-date information, where if there is something weird going on campus, then you're going to be able to find out. If you're trying to solution and solve right this minute and you don't have weeks or months to build these relationships, those are really great places to start and kind of get that information if you need it right in this moment and you're looking for a solution and tool right now.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, with that being said, let's go ahead and play this conversation from last week's Shop Talk. This will probably be 2 weeks by the time this comes out, which will be right in the middle of Interface. Everybody's going to love me at Interface.
Yay. Hey, I won't be there, so I don't have to worry about it.
There are some hard conversations that have got to be had. And, I know there's panels on this exact topic. And knowing some of the folks that is on at least one of those panels, I think they're going to have to, share some hard truth, and they're not going to be necessarily afraid to do it. But, for the most part, this kind of stuff's not going to get discussed at a conference. It's just not.
Not on panels. It's the stuff that we all talk about with each other. And that's the thing that has always been the important part of the podcast, right? Is that we have the conversation that we all know that we're talking about, but we're having it so that everyone can hear it, because this is how we solve problems, because it's the problems we're all having.
It'll happen in a workshop. There'll be a group of operators, even at Interface, that will have, a private meeting, in one of the rooms, and this is going to end up getting discussed.
Yeah.
And that's the way we work with this. But I can tell you, if you're like an equity person or something that's going to the conference and you plan on being at, some of these panels that I'm mentioning, understand it's a business development exercise, and they're certainly not going to say anything that puts their company in a bad light, or even someone else that's on that stage. And they're certainly not going to, put a bad light on the industry. And I don't think there's a bad light to put on it. It's just, we are just now really starting to see some of these things that, we haven't had to do over the past couple of years. We're starting to see that, okay, now we've got to get that stuff. We got to change our mentality about it a little bit. Someone's moved our cheese, right?
God, I haven't heard that in so long. Hey, and the good thing is that what I can say about this industry, though, dang, if we aren't good at moving fast. I mean, so it's fine. You know what I mean?
Oh yeah. I mean, I'll be really surprised if for May Shop Talk, which, by the way, if you haven't been to Shop Talk, you want to register to receive those invites, go to shoptalk.info. Again, that's shoptalk.info, and you can click on the registration link, and you'll get all of those invites. I
think I added it to our website too. I think it's at the bottom.
Well, you can certainly get to Shop. Yeah, you can certainly get to Shop Talk through the studenthouseinginsight.com website as well. But yeah, I mean, I think by the time we get to May, I will be surprised if it is still in that 2.2, 2.5 range. And I think, all in all, how we end up at the end of the leasing season, I think we'll be fine. And everything, we haven't talked about this, but the rates have continued to stay the same. They haven't really, I think they actually even went up a little bit between March and April, but from like 8.2 to 8.6 or something like that. But The other interesting thing, and I think I mentioned it in the conversation, is the markets. We've got 5 markets that we kind of dive into that are doing pretty, they're on the negative side of the spectrum. Berkeley, California, that we talked about, 10% behind year over year. Eugene, Oregon, 20% behind year over year. Clemson. Well, let me go back and talk about Berkeley and Eugene. That I think has more to do with the conventional markets having a lot of availability and a lot of concessions and stuff. Clemson at negative 13%, and Ben alludes to this. I think that market's probably push rents a little more than it needs to. We'll see, but I think that's a lot of the feedback that I'm getting. Tempe, Arizona, they are 15% behind year over year, and Tampa, Florida is 26% behind year over year.
Before we go, I do want one of the things that you did bring up, and one of the things that gets brought up on ShopTalk, and I know we keep dragging this out, so I apologize, but one thing that is mentioned a couple of times is about what the conventional properties are offering. So definitely, if you are in a struggling market or you are a struggling property, you have any of those situations, look into the conventional market and see if potentially that is contributing overall to the success or lack thereof of your area. Because if that is one of those things, it's always something to track and to know, because that's part of your shadow market, and that could be something to know about your market.
Well, and I will say, and I think just because it's the most visible, the managers and regional level folks that I've talked to, in the past month, if that's the contributor, they know it. I think a lot of it's just because you see it as a property manager. You're kind of honed into seeing things that are happening, both in physical print ad and digital ad, but also just you can kind of, you hear it from other folks of, well, hey, what kind of gift card are you going to give me? Well, who said anything about a gift card? Where have you heard that before? And it's kind of obvious. You start digging in and you find out
where they're going.
Yeah, exactly.
Figure out where your market's going. Yeah.
There are some markets that are doing fantastic though, year over year. I'll go through those. I love that
for them. Congratulations to everyone who's doing amazing year over year, by the way. I'm happy for you.
I'm happy for you. I'm hoping it's because you haven't got complacent or you're still in a situation where you can be complacent. But Auburn, Alabama is 5% ahead year over year. So is Lexington, Kentucky. Lawrence, Kansas is 12% ahead year over year.
Wow. Lawrence is not easy too.
Yeah. Columbia, Missouri, 6%. Stillwater is 3% ahead year over year. So
great job. Congratulations to those teams. I'm going to go ahead and say it's because those teams have done an amazing job and they worked exceedingly hard. So great job.
So yeah, with that being said, let's go ahead and move over to that conversation from ShopTalk. Really quick, there's a couple of things I want to kind of set up for this discussion, but to begin with, I want to go ahead and introduce our panel for this month. And Charlie, I'll let you start and you guys go through and introduce yourselves, and then I'll kind of set everything up for this discussion.
Absolutely. If you've been on here on ShopTalk before, you've heard me for the last couple of years now. But Charlie Matthews, founder of College House. Excited to chat through, I guess, our April state of affairs, pre-interface, leasing metrics, and everything in between. Joined by some lovely panelists today. Been in the industry a lot longer than I have. And I will turn it over to Stacey to start with some introductions.
Hi, guys. It's my first Shop Talk, so I'm actually super excited to be with you all here today. I'm Stacey Lecocke, Division President at Asset Living for all of our student properties. So I oversee all the 200 plus operational and new development properties, as well as all of the supporting resources to drive performance here. And I think I've been at Asset for 9 years, and then I'll hand it over to Zach.
Thanks so much, Stacey. This is also my first Shop Talk, so I'm just excited all around. But my name is Zach Newman. I'm a director of real estate for Greystar. I serve primarily our P3 on-campus assets with a main focus or a large focus in the Lexington, Kentucky market at the University of Kentucky. So I will turn it over to Ben.
Hi, y'all. Ben Modleski, Managing Director of Strategy and Research at Core Spaces. Been with Core since the very beginning. Been in the industry since 1996. That probably dates me a little bit here. I'm excited to be here, and thank you for inviting me, Wes.
Well, thanks to all of you folks for agreeing to give us the time. And Zach, we all recognize the blower in the background. I'm assuming today is mow the lawn day in Lexington. So
A lucky day.
Well, guys, really quick, let's kind of go down a little bit of what's happened this leasing season and how things got opened up. We actually did a webinar that wasn't related to everything with that was going on with ShopTalk. It was something separate that we're doing that we did in actually mid-September to kind of kick the leasing season off, because things were really people were starting to hit the ground. Not just our staff, but also we had folks that were students that were coming in that remembered the rush from last year, and they were like, hey, I want to go ahead and renew. I want to go ahead and sign. And so September, the latter part of September, everybody was talking about, it seems like it's going to be a big rush again. And these dates that you're seeing here are all the other ShopTalks. I think December 1st that's the data. I don't think we had the ShopTalk on December 1st, but this is how pre-leasing has been trending year over year. October 9th, 0.8% behind, so pretty much in track. November, we're almost 2 points ahead year over year. 1st of December, it's back to being right in line. Same thing with January. February, we see a little bit of falling behind. And then last month, we had something new to talk about because we were 2.3% behind year over year. And no one was really freaking out about it. Everything with rates we were still showing above 8% year over year with rental rate increases. But when I started moving into the second half of March, I started having a lot of conversations with folks that it was a little strange. I could sense, some worry in their voices. They were having properties in certain markets that were falling behind. And, we were all talking to each other about it. We had some folks these were some of the quotes that I wrote down from it. Across our portfolio, we're seeing properties struggle that's never struggled with leasing before. And one of our ambassadors, I think, was really freaking out because she'd seen the first gift card that she had seen being promoted in 3 years. So that got us talking with the leadership committee, and the leadership committee said, Wes, we want April's ShopTalk to kind of focus on this. Let's don't do another topic. Let's look at that. And we, of course, started asking ourselves, what are some of the things that could be causing it? Some of the things that were listed as possible factors is, large concessions at conventional properties, just general pushback on rate increases. We all have been talking about the Gen Z enrollment cliff that no one really knows when it's going to come. Some say 2025, some say 2030. And then something else that came up was financial aid delays or FAFSA delays. And we'll get into talking a little bit about that right now, because that's something that's in the news right now. It's getting a lot of attention, and I wanted to bring on this particular group of folks to talk about, what they're seeing. But before we get too far into that, I want to go ahead and bring up Zach and have a conversation with him, because he oversees a large P3 portfolio in Lexington, Kentucky. I think, what is it, Zach? 6,700 beds?
6,850 this year, north of 7,000 due to oversubscription.
Right. So your relationship, Greystar's relationship with all their university partners, because of that, this is something that you guys have been following pretty closely. So right. Over the past 3 weeks, as I've had these conversations, I've had a lot of people just ask what's going on with this, because, until about 2 or 3 weeks ago, this was not really in, the mainstream news. So catch everybody up for us, if you would.
Yeah. So just for those who don't know, FAFSA stands for the Free Application for Federal Student Aid. It's a form that current and prospective college students complete in the U.S., and it's used to determine their individual eligibility for financial aid. Historically, that application goes live on October 1st. Most recently, however, it was delayed all the way until December 31st. So nearly a 3-month delay, compared at least to the historical timeline.
Yeah, and I'll pull up a couple of news clips here. I think this one's actually from Forbes, but this was something that last March, they knew that this was going to be an issue. And I kind of take it back 3 years to 2020, Congress basically put out in front of the Department of Ed this mandate of, hey, you've got to change FAFSA because it's too cumbersome. You need something really simple. And that was the challenge that they were given. And yeah, starting this time last year, they said, yeah, it's not going to be ready for October 1st like it typically is. We're going to shoot for December 1st.
Yeah, I think the delay can largely be attributed to those changes in legislation. The FAFSA form itself sort of went under a revamp to a new digital form, had less questions, but unfortunately, it's just encountered technical difficulty after technical difficulty. And, once it did go live, things continued to go off the rails realistically. The Department of Education has just identified several formula calculation errors, which only extended the delay then of delivering information to the higher education institutions and ultimately to students. What we've seen in the past few weeks, especially the last 2 weeks of March, is that now applications are being processed, but unfortunately, those processed applications are just riddled again with errors. Over 200,000 of those processed apps were incorrect due to information that pulled wrong from the IRS system, which was a change this year, and another 650,000 that are having to be reprocessed due to formula issues that either woefully understated what a student could be eligible for in aid or just the opposite. It overstated what they could be eligible for. And realistically, the Department of Education has given very unclear guidance on how to treat those incorrectly processed applications. So all in all, the delay just continues.
Yeah, and yesterday there was actually a House committee hearing on it that you got to give everybody in Washington their chance to, anytime a problem comes up, to point the finger at each other. It was mostly Republicans pointing, at the administration, and Democrats pointing at the contractor that was hired to do this. But I wanted to just play a short clip from the Fox affiliate in DC yesterday, kind of summarizing what was discussed yesterday. Let me show that really quick.
Welcome back to the program to help college students determine how much federal aid has been facing technical problems for months. Congress now turning up the heat on the Biden administration and the Department of Education to fix it. Fox 5's Tom Fitzgerald live on the Hill tonight. And this is a time, Fitz, where you have parents and students looking at colleges. They want to know how they're going to pay for it. What's going on right now? This is a problem. It hasn't been fixed yet.
Yeah, this botched rollout of the free application for federal student aid has delayed college admissions. It's really stressed out a lot of students who are dealing with this and who are weeks away, remember, right now, for some of them, on their ultimate college decision. They can't find out right now just how much federal aid they are due to receive. So today, here on the Hill, a House committee opened up its first hearings on what the disastrous meltdown of FAFSA, as it's known, has been. Now, Republicans say that the Biden administration, for their part, has spending far too much time on its program of college loan forgiveness, when they say instead the administration should really be drilling in right now exactly why FAFSA is not working. Some university officials who appeared on the Hill today say this is creating massive amounts of stress for both students and the institutions they hope to attend.
Unfortunately, the rollout of Better FAFSA has been disappointing. My colleagues and I feel discouraged, frustrated, but most of all worried about the impact this will have on students' ability to attend college.
Students, schools, and institutions deserve answers. It is our responsibility as Congress to hold the executive branch accountable.
Now, the amount of damage in all this is evident in the numbers. Only about 27% of high school seniors have now successfully completed a FAFSA application, and according to the National Attainment College Network, say that applications overall are down about 40%. There were a lot of college students and high school students up here on the Hill today. They told Fox 5 they are very aware of this, and it's been causing them a lot of sleepless nights. Some D.C. officials from the Office of the State Superintendent tells Fox 5 they are advising young people to not give up hope.
A lot of my choice comes down to which school gives the best aid, if they give aid, how much debt I'll be in.
FAFSA is a kind of a way for students to be actually get through schools, those who can't afford it and stuff.
They would very much like to understand the cost of college, and without a completed FAFSA, understanding the cost is difficult.
One of the big concerns a lot of people have been running into, they can't edit their applications, change address, update their information, or get accurate information as to whether or not the changes they made were accepted. Fox 5 did reach out to the U.S. Department of Education tonight for a comment. We did not hear back. Live on the Hill tonight. Send it back at you.
All right. Well, that seems like it would have an impact on leasing. We'll get into that with our panel and see what they're experiencing. But well, Charlie, before we go to the numbers, I just wanted to point out, hey, I'd love for you guys in the audience to use chat to kind of talk about this. We want to know, are you seeing students that are not willing to sign a lease because they are waiting on financial aid letters? Charlie, let's talk about what the past 4 weeks look like.
Yes.
Get into it.
I'm ready to get into it. And full disclosure, I'm not as up to speed on the FAFSA situation. And, our panelists here will talk more in depth about their thoughts around that. But yes, April, good to be back here. I'm trying to think of the word I would describe things right now. I think generally speaking, like there has been some slowdown in specific markets, right? And I think anytime someone asks me about, student housing or whatnot, and of course you have to add the disclaimer, every market is different. So generally speaking, if we look at the performance nationally from a year-over-year perspective, we're sitting at 69.5%, about 2.2% behind, again, nationally, 280 markets across the subset here, where to put that into context, last year being, the behemoth of velocity that was experienced in student housing, we're still in line from a strong fundamental perspective. I think this is roughly about 6-7% above where the numbers were this time in 2022 as well. So you're still seeing strong outperformance. Again, if you put things in context from a historical standpoint, I was looking at a few markets as well, and the numbers here were still outperforming in a lot of your Southeast markets too, even though it's showing about 2.6% behind. 6, 7, 8, 9, even 10% ahead of where things were in 2020, 21, and 22. So putting that into context, again, we can't just continue to run up forever, but we're still relatively in line from a year-over-year perspective from a national pre-leasing.
Yeah, I mean, I've got to tell you, based on what we saw, 2.3, so it was actually a little higher in March. The conversations I was having at the end of March, I was thinking, oh God, we're going to see like 5% or something.
Spring break just lasted way longer this year.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, I was, kind of on the edge of what that number was going to look like, but we're still in line with last month. And I don't think last month was a huge shock to anybody.
No, definitely. And again, the conversations that we're, having with our clients and, I think that's the general consensus is just in some of these markets, right? It's a little bit of a slower roll where, again, a lot of what we'll talk about is supply and demand situations in a lot of these markets, but with the kind of current state of affairs, and we've had the run up on rates from the last couple of years, there are markets that are used to being, or properties that are used to being full or been full by, Christmas time, December, that you're sitting at 80%, where still supply and demand kind of holds true in pretty much all of these markets. And again, we'll get into more of the details here, but from a rates perspective, I think one thing that's pretty relevant here is if you look at the markets, I would say from the South, the Midwest, Southeast, Southwest, again, you're seeing the lower dollar kind of on an average rate per bed perspective, where from a pre-leasing behind, I think the Northeast is behind roughly about 4.5-5%. Again, you have a higher cost on a rate per bed perspective, higher cost of living in a lot of these, Northeast market. Same thing on the West Coast. We're seeing a little bit of, I think it's relatively in line, but generally speaking, you're about $120 above in the Northeast and you're on the West, where, again, part of the conversation today is what's really driving some of this. If you are experiencing it, to add additional disclaimers, there are properties and there are markets that are way ahead of last year, portfolios that are way ahead of last year. And again, a lot of this is being driven market specific, and a lot of that's due to, again, supply from new devs, as well as, from a demand from an enrollment perspective. So as we continue on, I think one of the trends that we've been tracking, again, related to price, again, putting things into context from I guess this is the last 4 years for points in time perspective, that bottom dark blue bar being AY 21-22. I mean, we're seeing roughly, again, we're going to try and let Charlie do math here, about $180 difference between the average rate per bed in this time in 2021 versus where we're at in 2024. So you've seen almost about a 30% lift in rents over the last 3 leasing cycles. So definitely something that may be causing some of the slowdowns in these respective markets. But generally speaking, I mean, rates are still, I think 8% was what that slide, so 8.2%. Fundamentally, student housing continues to be strong. And I think I see a lot of nodding heads from my panelists here. I mean, I don't think anybody's discounting the fact that we're still breathing the rare air here, from a fundamentals perspective. If you look at it in the broader context of the world, I know, Wes, on your initial slide, is it the concessions or the softening in the conventional market? Again, there's pieces of the puzzle to every market, but generally speaking, I mean, student housing remains strong. It's hard to kind of look past the numbers and see a 2% dip is a cause for a massive concern, where you're still 6-7% ahead on a leasing perspective on average in the last couple of years prior to the anomaly, which was last year.
Yeah, there's some markets out there, especially some of the, I guess more, urban markets where you've got a strong concentration of conventional, and these student housing properties are, competing with
the new entrant
properties that are doing 3-4 months free rent. I mean,
yeah,
and I think the students are going.
Yeah, we actually looked at this. And this was a couple months ago. I ran the national call with the good people at CBRE, and we looked at the urban markets versus what I would call your traditional college town. There's about 25, 30 or so urban markets. Think your large metropolitans, the Seattles, Minneapolises of the world. And the average occupancy, the average leasing velocity, and the average rate growth were, again, on a completely different spectrum, still in the 90% in occupancy. Pre-leasing was behind maybe 5-6%, where in the traditional college towns was, I think, up maybe 1.5%, give or take. So still, your traditional college towns, there's 240 of them, right, that we're tracking here, is still holding true. And, your occupancies are around the 90% mark, and rent growth is still pretty exceptional, given the fact that you just have lower rates per bed, and you're continuing to see that be kind of a driving factor across all fronts.
I want to go to Stacey and Ben and just ask you guys this question. I mean, Stacey, you're managing the second largest portfolio in the industry in this country, and the largest third party manager in the country. Ben, I can't exactly remember how many beds you guys are at. And you guys are also getting into the build to rent stuff, but want to hear from you guys. Are you guys seeing this type of dip with your portfolios?
We are at asset. And to Charlie's point, I love the resiliency that we see in the student side of the space. This morning, I woke up to our teams hitting 72%. So we are 2% ahead of last year. So truthfully, it's not a gloom and doom story for us here at Asset. That's not to say that I don't recognize and agree that current challenges exist in the industry. I mean, I see that, but I've just been really proud of how our teams have persevered to keep us on pace and ahead of last year. And yes, we do have some markets that we might be trailing in. We have red alert sites just like anybody else does, but just recognizing and addressing those challenges head on is crucial.
Ben, how about with Core's portfolio?
Core's portfolio, we're 83% pre-lease same store. So we're doing really excellent. Let's face it, it's really hard to keep up with last year when last year is a banner year for everybody. We're 1.25% behind prior year. That said, we're getting some good momentum now and totally expect to exceed prior year by the fall. But this is a challenge. We're really aggressive at Core. We also track both our direct and our indirect comps at Core. And across the same store group of properties, we're about 3.5% ahead of our direct comps. So we feel good about that. And as for rate growth, if we want to talk about that, our unweighted average effective rent growth is 9.7%. Very strong. Yeah. In markets where we've seen a decrease in velocity, it's almost always been driven by development, supply and demand. And sometimes it's our own fault. We had 1,000 beds to a market. It's going to be a little bit more of a struggle.
Are you seeing any difference between, because a lot of what Core does is new development, obviously, but you guys have also done, a lot of value add stuff. Seeing any differences between value add and some of your more recent deliveries?
That's a really good question. So the same store, we're seeing probably the best results in overall. It's already built, it's existing, students know it, and we know everything about it. We've already leased it up once before. The acquisitions are a little tougher. We get in there, acquire something. We don't quite know everything about the market. Sometimes, the prior owner has shared a lot of things with us, sometimes not. So it does make that one a little more challenging. And then, of course, the new devs, It just depends market to market. Some of these new devs have been a real challenge, and other ones like are a big home run for us. So it's really market specific with those.
Stacey, you want to go back to what you were saying?
Yeah, so sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. I meant to add on the rent growth piece, we're looking to hit double digits. We've signed just around what Ben had mentioned, just under 10% on the leases we've signed so far, and we expect that to grow. So looking for a banner year around the rent growth as well. So again, I recognize that this side of the space is, has challenges and can be harder and more fast-paced than the multifamily side, but we're just not seeing, a lack of optimism in the performance.
So I want to get back to this financial aid thing, because your properties are performing well, but getting into certain markets, are you hearing anything from site staff or from residents who just aren't willing to sign that renewal yet? What kind of feedback are you hearing from the site level on that?
It's not that we don't hear any feedback regarding it, but it certainly isn't a leading reason. I'd say, if you had the top 5, it'd be maybe number 5. And that's really more in the tier 2 or tier 3 markets. I wouldn't say that it's really a soundbite for us around that topic of a reason for slower traffic or slower leasing. In the markets where leasing might be slower, it's really, Charlie made the point earlier, supply and demand, and you just have to outpace and get more than your market share in those situations. Then, of course, rent growth. Sometimes you sacrifice momentum or velocity to get that rent, and you just have to sleep well at night knowing that that's the strategy.
Ben, how about from your site?
Yeah, Wes, for us, it's really impossible to say that there's any correlation between FAFSA and leasing velocity. We did a quick examination of all of our properties, just looking at January to April this year versus the velocity of January to April last year. And there's really no correlation at all at most of the properties. Where we do seem to have some, where it's not correlated, we also have a lot of new supply coming into those markets. So you ask yourself, is it really FAFSA or is it new supply? Pick one. Remember, FAFSA is only really affecting freshmen and transfers right now. Most of the residents are not freshmen at our properties, and continuing undergrads don't receive their financial aid award until May, June, or July. But there is one intriguing market that I was thinking about, and that's Penn State. And at Penn State, we have over 2,700 beds in that market. 1,200 were opening for the fall of 2024. So as you can imagine, that has definitely impacted the market, getting 1,200 brand new beds. But in the case of Penn State, there's a good amount of students who actually transfer from branch campuses into the main campus at State College. And those are actually being affected by the FAFSA delay. So those transfers, we've actually heard from a couple of dads in the market that this is happening to friends of their own children. But I gotta say, it's rare. Some schools are already announcing increases in freshman commitments versus the same time last year. Other schools have already announced that the dorms are going to be full with waiting lists.
So Zach, I want to go to you on the, kind of the on-campus side. You're there in Lexington. I think, Charlie, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think they were, running about 10% year over year in the off-campus market. How is the financial aid delay? How is that impacting, obviously, the housing department and the folks at UK with assignments? And what are you hearing from other Greystar university partners? Or are they talking about this delay causing any issues?
I can speak directly from some experience here. We've made it pretty deep into the leasing cycle for these on-campus properties. And we are hearing directly from some students that the delay in the FAFSA processing, it is delaying their decision-making as well. But to Ben's point, it's really centered around new students. Right now, what we're seeing is that returning students aren't as skittish about signing that lease either on or
let me just ask for a point of clarification there. When you say new students, are you talking about all first-time students, or are you talking about transfers as well?
Transfers as well. And we're seeing that sort of across the board. Those who just don't understand what their financial aid package may look like. And because we're hearing from returning students, as we would call them, a sophomore or plus, who've been at the institution before, they can reasonably expect what that financial aid package may look like unless they had a material change in income at the familial level year over year. So they're making those decisions. And right now, what we see is that more upperclassmen are receiving a housing assignment because they're more confident in what next year looks like. But I think there's a concern that once first-time students start to see financial aid packages and they make commitments, it may bump some of those upperclassmen back off campus. So I think it's right now, it is a frustration point for university partners. And we're hearing that at many of the P3s on campus, but they're moving forward. Whether they delayed their commitment date or not, we're moving forward with the leasing process.
Gotcha. Well, it sounds like there's not, that big of an impact. I'm kind of torn on this because it's kind of like, there it is. That's what we can blame. And, it just doesn't seem like that's really the case. I mean, we'll see how the rest of the leasing season, how that ends up panning out on things. But again, Charlie, to go back to the slide earlier with, just being last month we're 2.3, this year we're 2.2. I'm not saying it's not happening in some markets, but, it's been alluded to, but it doesn't seem to really be, a big cause. But, that 2.2%, that's the average, right? So on either end of that spectrum, there's some pretty wild swings. Yeah. You've picked out some markets that we want to get into. I'll pull those up here in just a second, but I'll let you take it from here and let's jump into some of these single markets.
Yeah, for sure. No, I think, kind of hit the nail on the head. As we look through and specifically, let's go back to the floor plan one real quick, because it'll help kind of contextualize a couple things. If we look at nationally, right, from a floor plan perspective, again, a lot of your, I wouldn't say underperformance, but a lot of your lagging indicators are really tied to the higher price floor plans. And we've had this same kind of conversation of the last 3 or 4 of these, shop talks where, again, from a unit perspective, a lot of this is the studios, the 1s and the 2s, where, again, higher price points, there may be a little bit of hesitancy. We've had a large run up because of the supply and demand challenges that I guess are benefiting, from the property perspective. And we've gotten through roughly about, call it 60 to 70% of the fall 23 enrollments as that data becomes available. And I'm seeing a ton of schools that are growing. And I think from a standpoint of supply of living options, I think the on-campus housing is always a little bit lagged for where the actual rent growth or the actual enrollment growth happens, where you're seeing this happen in a lot of these markets across the U.S., where even in Knoxville, Tennessee, where on paper right now it's behind, like the supply and demand is so imbalanced and there's just not enough living options for students. So one of the things that we're really seeing, again, just from a trends perspective, as we look here from a national, point of view, you're not seeing a huge delta in your larger unit types, the 3s, 4s, 5s, and 6s. And again, if we correlate that to a price point, they're a lower price per bed, whereas the pre-lease is, a point and a half, give or take. With the 4 bedrooms being 452,000 of those beds, 1.3% behind them, maybe one unit in the respective property. So generally speaking, the only thing that I can pull from this is again, there might be a little bit of a price barrier on some of these smaller unit types, but generally speaking, you're seeing pretty strong rent growth numbers and people are, not really faltering with their plans and kind of sticking to the program where there's not a lot of cause for concern due to the supply and demand challenges that are facing a lot of these university markets. So to that point of what's behind, what's ahead, again, like you can't have every market doing great. There's still some nuances here. So
let's talk about some markets that are doing good, though.
Yeah, we'll talk about a few markets that are doing good. And one of the key things that I've looked at here, and this is, I guess a lot of your Midwest. If you saw on the first slide that I showed, your Midwest is one of the only regions that is actually outperforming. So you got Lawrence, Kansas. I guess we're going to call it Columbia, Missouri, an SEC school, but we're gonna bucket them in the Midwest there, and then Stillwater, Oklahoma, where you've got 12, 6, 3% ahead year over year. And then your rate growth is kind of trending from a different perspective. And then some of your larger marquee schools, I actually realized there's a typo on the Lexington side. It's actually closer to 10% on the rent growth, and they're 5% ahead. But one of the key things that I've seen, and again, I'm going to say supply and demand about 10 more times, is that if you look at the cost of development these days, and Ben can probably speak to this better than I can, it is very expensive to get a lot of these new development deals to pencil, whether that's land costs, just costs of everything going up. Where we ran an analysis at the end of last year, and you looked at the average rate for a new delivery in 21, 22, and 23. In 21, it was $1,000. In 22, it was $1,100. And in 23, it was $1,200. And if you look at a lot of these markets here that are seeing the outperformance on a pre-leasing perspective, Lawrence, Kansas, sub $700 a bed, as much as the developer wants to get into these markets, the delta between what they have to build that property at versus what the current rate in that market is such a large swing that if you go to get financing, or even if you could be the strongest conviction, you have to convince other people to give you the money to do these deals. And a difference in $300 between what the current rate per bed in the market is versus what you have to build it at is really challenging to shift the supply and demand imbalance that we're seeing in a lot of these markets, where, you know, the Auburns, the Lexingtons, the Lawrence, the Columbias, and Stillwaters of the world, there's dozens and dozens of markets that are in a similar situation where economically it's almost impossible to be able to build something in those markets to shift. And a lot of these schools like Auburn, like Lexington, like Lawrence, like Stillwater and Columbia are seeing either flat or increases of enrollment. So these students aren't really going anywhere. So that's one of the key drivers that I'm seeing, you know, from a data perspective of what's the trend. It is the inability to pencil the development deals in a lot of these markets that just have a lower rate per bed, because the delta between what you have to build it at versus what's the current situation in the market is such a wide gap. And then I think to look at the other side of the coin, jumping over to the notable challenging markets. Again, if you look at the rate per bed here, pricing from a per bed perspective is relatively in line there, where one of the things I mentioned on the urban markets, call it, a Berkeley, California, we're going to call Tampa, Florida a little more urban. But you're seeing, some significant delays there, or lagging indicators on the pre-leasing perspective. And, from a rent growth, it's not like, they're shooting for the moon and things are slowing down. I think it's definitely a softening in the conventional side, the urban markets. And also, new supply has come into all 5 of these markets pretty consistently over the last 3 to 4 years. So you're starting to see that matrix of demand meet supply, and, things have leveled out where the outperformance in the last couple of years, because so many of those projects were delayed due to the COVID era, and enrollment continued to grow. So I think Jason Fort says the SEC dominates again. I think it holds true. A lot of students that are, flocking to a lot of these Southeastern schools for that college experience, where they're from the Northeast or the West Coast, the higher cost of living, go to in Auburn, Alabama, and it's $900. That's, in comparison to where they come from, it's way cheaper. It's the easiest way to put it.
Something I noticed here on this average rate per bed, I'll go back to the other one. And I don't, what do they say? Correlation doesn't mean causation. All of these that are trending ahead are all sub, average 1,000 per bed. And all of these are, and you've got a good mix of urban and grant type of universities.
Yeah. So I can't point. I even asked a couple people, should I run a report that shows, the FAFSA delays? And it's versus pre-leasing velocity, it'd be immaterial, because so many of these different markets are different story, but you can't point the finger there. The things that are challenging is driven by supply and demand, which I don't know how much I paid attention to my Econ 101 class, but I think it's really running its course in the markets. We're seeing some lagging indicators on, where I know groups that are in Tempe and in Tampa last year were probably full, close to full this time. 89% as a market would have been for Tempe, and making me do math on the top of my head, 81% in Tampa. There's definitely some significant slowdown there.
Quick question for you, Charlie, from Mike Kivitz at Price Company. We've seen a big decline in Tallahassee, but College House shows it as top market. Are others experiencing similar issues in Tallahassee? So for the folks that are out there, please put it in the chat what you're seeing if you want to reply.
I'll add a disclaimer to that. That is a spot weighted average of beds with occupancy, average rate, and pre-lease versus the national average. So a market like Tallahassee with 30,000+ beds, 96% current occupancy is going to show up a little higher than others.
Gotcha.
So just to note that there's been some enrollment declines over the last couple of years, and there's one of the largest pipelines that is coming in Tallahassee. So it's definitely something to keep an eye on as it relates to what could happen here over the next couple of years.
Yeah. Well, hey, I want to ask in the final minutes that we've got here, Stacey and Ben, anything with these markets that you're saying, that you're observing, your teams are observing that, might add some additional insight?
On this chart here that Charlie has, I'm in 3 of those markets. And truthfully, I think using the market trends that we have that go back 7, 8, even 10 years, so that we can do things like setting rates early, even during turn, so that we're ready to launch, is what's positioned us to be successful. Again, I know that this is on a challenging markets list, but the properties that I have in those markets are all weathering the storm and persevering. So I think it just goes back to using the data that you have, and we have so many years of data that we can rely on to make good decisions. So I do recognize that why these markets are on this slide, but I think it's just how you manage through it.
Yeah. Ben?
Yeah, for us, first of all, on the good markets, we love Lexington. I mean, that was a great situation that happened last year with the campus overbooking on the freshman dorms and actually turning double rooms into tri-suites. And then this year coming out early and saying, hey, our dorms are going to be full. That pretty much filled our properties within a couple months. Over at Berkeley, I think for us there, we only have 238 beds, but we're watching this carefully. We actually have some input there. We ran a study in that market that showed that 61% of the individuals that we surveyed were living 10 minutes or more away from campus. So they're opting to walk or even bike or take a bus with multiple stops to get to campus because the multifamily housing further away was impacted by the tech jobs leaving the area and therefore dropped their rates, making it more enticing for our students and that we're going after to move further away. So to hedge against rate challenges there, we actually modified plans for our next development in Berkeley to include a higher number of price sensitive unit types, including bunks and pods and other designs that can help ensure affordability.
Ben, I want to ask you too, because the commercial market, the office market there has just, so much of that stuff in San Francisco just sitting empty. Are you seeing folks that are looking at possibly converting that?
We haven't come across that yet. It's a little further away. I don't really expect that, but yeah, that hasn't come up on the radar yet. Good idea. Over in Clemson, our management is hearing there that the residents are kind of waiting for the best deal. There was an article last week in the Tiger talking about the Clemson housing epidemic's out of hand, stressing that rent was too high. Wall Street Journal did an article that highlighted 2019 Clemson rates. Starting in 2019, the rates in Clemson have risen faster than maybe any other place in the nation. But we feel good about Clemson because just this past February, the school announced that they want to reach 50,000 students and they're going to grow enrollment by at least 2% every year. So who doesn't like that?
Well, let me tell you, I've lived in the Carolinas all but 8 years of my life, and that is so not Clemson. For the longest time, they pretended to be, kind of this.
They wanted small town feel.
Well, it's not just so much the small town feel. They wanted to be exclusive, and the state legislature every year is like, you got to accept more of your state universities.
Yeah, and actually this year they had 23,000 undergraduate students were admitted. 3,283 applications fully committed to Clemson already versus 2,598 same time last year. So FAFSA didn't slow down at all the number of freshmen committing to go to Clemson. However, they actually came out and said that there's a 3% decline in applicants from underrepresented populations. So that they're attributing to some FAFSA delays. I think that's the concern. I think the larger concern here with FAFSA, going back to our original talk, is that what if these individuals, these incoming students, do not fill out their FAFSA forms? They believe it's too complicated. They just get frustrated by it. They're not getting the help that they need. And then they decide not to enroll in school this year. Then we would see an enrollment drop. That's something that none of us want to see. So that's something that we're kind of keeping an eye on. FAFSA right now is important, but even more important in my eyes is, are we getting those students that are underrepresented to actually get the form filled out and get enrolled somewhere so we can keep that college population high?
Well, great. Well, guys, we are at the top of the hour. So I want to be respectful of everybody's time. Thanks so much for being a part of this and giving us your insights. I'm glad that both Asset and Core are not taking it on the chin like some of the other operators and property managers I've talked to over the past few weeks. And it looks like everything is, I think it's going to all equal out, but we'll see what happens next month. Guys, thanks so much.
See you in Austin. Thanks, Wes.
Take care.
Thanks, everybody.
Well, again, a big thanks to Stacey and Ben and Zach and Charlie for giving up their time to have that important conversation. I'll tell you, with Stacey, it was a little, she was a little bit embarrassed, I think, to go on because assets doing well. And, she kind of expressed that she was a little nervous as to how everything would be received. So Stacey,
I love that for them.
Yeah. I mean, we talked about it when I did the profile interview with Stacey back earlier in the year. And gosh, it's hard to believe we're already saying earlier in the year. But she was so proud of her team and what was happening, from a year-over-year standpoint. And so just congrats to not only Stacey, but the Asset Living team and what you guys are doing this year. Well, hey, with that being said, I think it's time to say goodbye to everybody, and we'll talk to you in another week or so. I'll have some feedback as to what happened at Interface, if everybody took me off their invite list after all the things I've said today. And so looking forward to that. If you happen to hear this before you get there, make sure that you say hello to me, and hopefully that's hello that you're telling me with your hand and not something else. But
smack around a little bit. It's fine.
Yeah, we'll see you there. Again, please, if you want to get this information each month, make sure that you're signed up for ShopTalk. Again, that's at shoptalk.info. And again, I just want to thank our sponsor for this episode, the Guarantors. If you want to make sure that you're getting as many approved applications as possible, I would strongly suggest talking to the Guarantors about their rent guarantee program, which actually just eliminates the needs for parental guarantors altogether. So, and they've also, that same product does a fantastic job with eliminating bad debt as well. So go check them out at theguarantors.com/student. Greta, anything else?
I got nothing.
All right. Well, we'll see. Have fun in Indianapolis. I'll send you pictures from Austin.
Oh my gosh, you better.
All right. Take care, everyone.
Bye.